Hi, this is an email from Tammy. Tammy says, I was listening to some of your YouTube clips and you used the words fully recovered. Could you please do a clip on what your definition of fully recovered is and what some signs for the physically and mentally? Like how do you know when you're ready to reintroduce things like exercise, traveling, a job, etc.? Good question. So I wrote a book which goes into this quite a lot. I'm not going to completely regurgitate that whole however many thousand words book. Stinky! For a YouTube video. Sorry about the cats. Cats, I can't control them, okay? They do what they do. So, fully recovered. Yes, I do consider myself fully recovered, and what that means to me is it's helpful that I knew what I was like before my eating disorder because my onset was around 18 years old, and I knew how I ate then, I knew what I liked to eat, I knew how I was around food, how I was as a person, what my interests were, and I'd say that for me, full recovery was a complete return to that. So before anorexia, I was always a person that would choose a cheeseburger over a salad, and dessert was always something like hot chocolate brownies with ice cream, not a granola bar. And so for me, now I am a person who will choose a cheeseburger over a salad. That's just the way I am. That's the way I eat. I always ate a lot, and I eat a lot right now, and I never used to give two thoughts about how I was eating or what I was eating, and that's the way I am now. So for me, a lot of what full recovery is a complete return to the way I was around food, and not just food, other things like money, leisure time, putting my feet up, as to how I am now. Even my interests have returned right back to what they were before my eating disorder. I was always horse obsessed before I had an eating disorder. When I had anorexia, I was suddenly gym obsessed and the horses really took a complete back burner, and now I'm horse obsessed again. All the things kind of gradually came back. But majorly, and what I go into in my book, are the mental state changes. And so I'm not going to talk about all of them here because I've got a whole damn list of these mental state changes. But for me, one that I really want to point out is that food should not be emotional. This should not be a highly emotional thing. And if you're still having a highly emotional response to food, like I did, say if I was sitting at home and my mother walked in with a cheese sandwich, I would have a highly emotional response to that. It would be a highly emotional fuck you response to that. That's not normal. There is nothing normal about that. If I'm sitting here now, if my mother, I wish she would, walked in with a cheese sandwich, I'd be like, oh, cheers. Like, there's no emotion there. It's not a threat to me. And so that's one of the key, I'd say, mental state markers. And that's one it's really difficult for you to bullshit your way out of that. If you're sort of like talking about weight, you can always bullshit yourself that, oh, my weight's fine, blah, 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 whatever. If you're having an emotional reaction to food, that's not normal. And that's quite black and white. And you know if you're having an emotional reaction to food or not. You might be able to like hide it, but that's a sign that you're still in an energy deficit. As I said, this is a really, there's a lot in this question. I'm not going to answer it all now, but Tammy did ask, how do you know when you're ready to reintroduce exercise, traveling, a job, etc.? Now, this is more to do with neural rewiring than it is to do with nutritional rehabilitation. Having put on weight is not a signal that you are anywhere near fully recovered. It's a good step in the right direction, but that's about it. So the way I like to describe this neural rewiring part, which is all of these things, exercise, traveling, a job, can be things that would trigger those eating disorder neural pathways to fire up. Exercise, for most of us, is a huge one. You start exercising again, your brain just associates that with all these eating disorder behaviors, and before you know it, you're eating salad. So it takes a long time for those neural connections to dissolve. And for me, it took around 2 years. So this is 2 years after I've more or less nutritionally rehabilitated, and 2 years after I'm making those huge changes to rewire my brain. And so 2 years after is when really I felt that I might be able to do some exercise and it wouldn't become compulsive. And so I think that a good way to think about this is that, say if you were in an abusive relationship and one day you made the decision to leave, you leave that relationship. From the day that you leave that relationship, your life will change, and hopefully for the better. Things will be massively better. But it's probably going to take a couple of years before you could not have a kind of like neural pathway reaction to something that might trigger you to remember that relationship. It's a bit like a PTSD thing, that's also neural rewiring. So it's going to take a couple of years before you could walk down that street that you used to live in without having a kind of like response, because your brain associates that place with having that response. And so it can take a long time for neural pathways to rewire. And for me, the exercise thing definitely took over 2 years before I could maybe, like do stuff like just, I'd say like I didn't really ever start running again, so that's not really a good example. I think that I've maybe tried to and gone for a run and got maybe like not very far and then thought, fuck this, I hate it, and turned back. But if I'd gone for a run within that 2 year period, I don't think that would have happened. I think that I would have just suddenly been like, oh, my brain would have like switched back into mode. And so I consider this like couple of years after you really start to make those massive changes, and a couple of years after nutritional rehabilitation, that for exercise at least I wait a couple of years, otherwise it's just going to spark off all those neural pathways. Things like traveling, a job, I think that's I can't answer that for you. Like, that depends on the person. And I started traveling because that was actually something that was not something my eating disorder allowed me to do. So for me, traveling and allow myself to do that and spend money and relax was actually part of my rewiring. So I started doing that pretty early on in recovery. If that's not the case for you, then you can't do that. You have to change that. So I guess the answer to this question, Tammy, is there's no quick and easy answer to this question. This is exactly the sort of thing that I would need to be working with someone one-on-one to be able to talk through them and help them work out where they are in that process, where they are in the neural rewiring process, because everybody is individual. It may have taken me about 2 years to rewire the exercise thing, and it might take someone else 5. It might take someone else 1. Like, ultimately, erring on the side of caution, especially with exercise, just don't do it. Don't need to. So, and that's what I did for a really long time. I just didn't do any. And by the time that I kind of knew that also the person that I was before I had anorexia was not a gym bunny. I never went to the gym. So for me, I'm never going to go to the gym again, because it's just not who I am when I don't have an eating disorder. So it's a bit of a moot point, the exercise. I guess I don't really do it. I mean, I move a lot, I ride horses, but I'm never going to have a gym membership again. I can tell you that. And that's not because I can't, it's because I don't want to.